Hello, welcome to the Taming the Tongue exhibit. The full name is Taming the Tongue in the Heyday of English Grammar, 1711 to 1851. It's a Grolier Club exhibit. It's a Grolier Club imprint on the accompanying book. It's a 328-page book, sort of a COVID project for me. 525 illustrations in the book and a lot of interesting stories, biographical stories about these grammarians who were working in the period. The reason I started in 1711 for this exhibition is that was the year when Jonathan Swift and Joseph Addison called for the creation of an English Academy to declare what is good English. That never got off the ground. What happened instead was this great, period of competition and rivalry in a very fervent attempt to achieve preeminence in the field of grammar. Grammar books were second only to Bibles in sales. And it's hard for us to believe. It's almost unthinkable, the fervor with which English grammar was taught and studied during the century and a half that we're talking about. Some grammarians of the period offered beautiful tributes to the language. Others came for a battle armed with claims of invincibility against allegedly incompetent rivals. Plagiarism, fury, and scandal plagued the coveted territory. So Taming the Tongue tells the colorful story of these books and the characters who wrote them. Now what I'm going to do is just give you the highlights. I'm just going to sort of walk you through the exhibit online, virtually in this way. The fact is, the exhibit is one that I will never see, because it's up from March 4th through May 15th, and I won't be able to travel to New York during that period, unfortunately. I will get a lot of good accounts of it, and maybe if you're able to visit in person, you'll tell me your own thoughts about it. But what I'm going to do is not take you through all the various exhibited items, but only a few highlights. So we begin with 1711. The first item being exhibited is actually a Latin grammar, but I'm going to begin with the 1711 John Brightland and Charles Gildon grammar, a grammar of the English tongue. Notice that Brightland is the publisher or printer. Gildon worked for him and is thought to be the primary author. Gildon lived from 1665 until 1724. He is described by the Dictionary of National Biography as one of the most unfortunate scribblers of his time. He was satirized in Alexander Pope's Dunciad, and he was denounced by Jonathan Swift. To promote the book, the authors appropriated Jonathan Swift's pseudonym, Isaac Bickerstaff, and they named him the book's, quote, censor, and attributed laudatory comments to him. So Bickerstaff is fictitiously said to have remarked about the book, buy, read, and study this grammar. By 1714, it was in a third edition. So in the middle photograph here, you have the 1711 on the left, 1711 first edition, 1712 second edition, and then the third edition of 1714. The next item is Elizabeth Elstob's Rudiments of Grammar. She was a remarkable person, raised by an uncle who was very much opposed to female education, and she had quite some hardships early in life. She pursued Anglo-Saxon studies in the 1690s with a group of Oxford scholars, including her brother William, a fellow at University College. In 1708, she published 2 books, and then in 1709, she published a 10th century homily by Alfric with Anglo-Saxon glosses. The Rudiments, her last book, is a remarkable feat, the first ever grammar of Old English. Her incisive intellect is on full display in the preface, where she cheerfully derides Jonathan Swift. There is her likeness, her portrait actually, from the first page. So the first word of the book is grammar, and the G from the grammar frames her portrait. She is the first grammarian of the period for whom we have a likeness. Elizabeth Elstob. Samuel Johnson's Grammar of the English Language appears in the front matter of his great dictionary of 1755. Here you see a rather unusual copy with uncut pages. Very few of those survive. He is one of the two most illustrious writers ever to have written an English grammar, the other being the playwright Ben Jonson, whose English grammar appeared posthumously in 1640. Samuel Johnson's grammar, very short, was essentially a translation of a 1653 grammar of English that was written in Latin, as many 17th century English grammars appeared in Latin. And it was the last piece prepared for his 1755 dictionary. Samuel Johnson followed, as he said, quote, the common grammarians, and he disparaged innovators whose new terms have sunk their grammatical learning into neglect. Samuel Johnson, unforgettable. And Fisher, too, very important figure in the history of English grammar. Her practical new grammar, thought to have first appeared in the 1740s. Mine is a 7th edition of 1762. She was born in Cumberland in 1719, lived until 1778, became a business partner with her husband, the printer Thomas Slack, who also founded the Newcastle Chronicle. She was a mother of 9. She wrote many pedagogical works. This grammar is in the form of a catechism, a long series of questions and answers, and she is remembered chiefly as the grammarian who first stated a rule that still sparks controversy, that the masculine pronoun includes the feminine. Anne Fisher. Robert Lowth later became Bishop of Oxford and Bishop of London, but he published his Introduction to English Grammar anonymously. He generally didn't appear on the title page except in later editions and mostly pirated copies, but after his death. He was a clergyman, a poet, a Hebrew scholar, lived from 1710 to 1787. Apart from Lindley Murray, he was the most influential grammarian of the 18th century. His work was widely pirated, pilfered, and plagiarized. He's often misunderstood as having been archly prescriptive, when in fact he was aware of the different registers in language and understood the structure of English as well as anyone in his day. First editions are exceedingly scarce. I've never been able to get one. This is the new, so the first edition, 1762, this is from 1767. Joseph Priestley, Rudiments of English Grammar. Now, the second edition of 1768 was vastly reworked from his first edition. Of course, Priestley is the scientist who was credited with discovering oxygen, and he was the greatest 18th century intellect to give intense study to grammar. He rebelled against English grammarians being too heavily influenced by Latin, and he was among the earliest English language grammarians to embrace the idea that universal usage governs propriety. As William Safire said, if everybody's wrong, we're all right. He may have been the first to defend "he is taller than me," treating than as a preposition, over the more orthodox "he is taller than I," treating than as a conjunction. Now we come to Noah Webster, who actually began his career as a grammarian, not a lexicographer, and he came out with what he called the Grammatical Institute of the English Language. First was a speller of 1783, then the so-called grammar of 1784. That's part 2. And then part 3 was a reader, 1785. Here you see the 1784 and 1785 versions of part 2. Webster came of age during the American Revolution, attended Yale, and then tried without success to establish a career as both a lawyer and a schoolmaster. He wrote a speller, and then this grammar, and then a reader. Shortly after the grammar appeared, Webster was accused by the pseudonymous Dilworth's Ghost of transcribing others' work in a, quote, laughable affair. His written defense against literary theft was that, quote, these are Webster's words, every grammarian whose works I have seen is liable to the charge of plagiarism. That is Webster in 1785. He would later change his tune. This is the famous porcupine portrait of Noah Webster. The one on the right is actually signed by Webster, 1797. This is from the Reader, a reprint of the Reader, but Webster autographs on books themselves, rather unusual. Now, item number 30 is one of the most interesting in the exhibition. It's probably one of the greatest discoveries I've ever had. It is a contract between Noah Webster and Lindley Murray. Noah Webster is contracting to buy real estate from Lindley Murray. And it really marks, this document, a turning point in literary history. Lindley Murray is the American expatriate, remember, living in York, England, and he has agreed through agents to sell land in downtown New York to Noah Webster on Water Street. In the 6 months following, Murray wrote the book that would earn him the moniker the father of English grammar, ultimately selling 15.5 million copies of his literacy books. Eclipsed in grammar, Webster soon turned primarily to lexicography. Biographers have been unaware of this link between the men. Never before has this document been displayed with an understanding of its significance. And my thought is, it just seems more than coincidental that they enter into this deal, and 6 or 7 months later, Murray comes out with his grammar. That his brother, John Murray, not the publisher John Murray, but John Murray of New York, probably told him, you're selling this land to a grammarian. And Lindley decided, well, I think I'll do a grammar. As a result of which, in 1795, he came out with his grammar. I'm displaying here the second edition of 1796. Remember that Murray was an American Quaker who moved to York, perhaps after his family was caught trading with the British after the Revolution. He seems to have been a royalist and to have opposed the American Revolution. In retirement in York, he wrote 2 books on religion, and then 6 months after contracting to sell his New York real estate to Noah Webster, this historic grammar. With it, he became one of the best-selling authors of the 19th century, and he became the foe of Noah Webster. John Horne Tooke, quite a character. So the first volume of Epia Tarenta was the first edition. Only the second edition has both volumes. They were published in 1798 and 1805. Epia Tarenta means, the Greek title, which is kind of obscure, the whole book is kind of obscure, winged words. The title suggests its fancifully obscure style. Tooke, who lived from 1736 to 1812, was a radical reformer in politics, law, and philology. In the 1770s, he was imprisoned for criminal libel. In 1794, in a notorious trial, he was acquitted of high treason. With quirky linguistic theories, he insisted, for example, that if is really a verb equivalent to give. The only essential words, he thought, are nouns and verbs, all others being abbreviations. Historical linguists today say that his influence stultified linguistic learning for many decades. Horne Tooke. Jane Gardner wrote her English grammar. She was the daughter of the scientist John Arden. Gardner lived from 1758 to 1840. He grew up with Mary Wollstonecraft, a founding feminist philosopher. As teenagers, the girls had a tempestuous relationship, as their surviving letters show. Gardner became the headmistress of schools in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. She modeled her English grammar on French instead of Latin because all girls' schools taught French. Copies of her books were used as student prizes. This one, as noted probably in Gardner's own hand, was a prize for improved reading. Next comes William Cobbett. What a character William Cobbett was. Sort of a literary swashbuckler. Best known as an incendiary English journalist, Cobbett, whose years were 1763 to 1835, spent much of his life under the threat of prosecution and imprisonment. Twice, he fled to America for a period of years. On the second sojourn, living on Long Island and penning this grammar free from all abstruseness, as he put it. The first two editions, were dedicated to William Benbow, a compatriot, actually a pornographer, but also a publisher, who helped Cobbett exhume the bones of Thomas Paine and take them to England, for which Cobbett was ingloriously named Bone Grubber. The bones were among Cobbett's personal effects at his death. This is a copy of the first edition, actually signed by Cobbett to another journalist named John Wood. Samuel Kirkham inspired Abraham Lincoln, who as a teenager walked miles to get a copy of the grammar and then memorized it. By 1829, the book was selling 22,000 copies annually. The big fold-out was a major innovation. An aficionado of phrenology, Kirkham left his skull to his wife and then to his son and then to a phrenological society. His outre obituary began, "His head was 21 inches around, but was more high and long than large at the base." The loving remembrance goes on to say that Kirkham was among, quote, "the most irritable and fretful of men." I imagine the typo in the title page. Notice that it doesn't say English grammar, it says English grammar. Might have made him a little fretful. These are various editions of Kirkham's grammar in my collection. Lindley Murray's Last Will and Testament. So Lindley Murray died in 1826. In 1996, I found this copy of Johnson's dictionary, an 1818 Todd revision of Johnson, with Lindley Murray's handwritten will inside, disposing of his most valued books, including this very copy of Johnson. He willed 20 volumes to his namesake, William Murray Tooke. Went on to found Barclays Bank, believe it or not. His son, grandson, and great-grandson, Tooke's all, served as the chairs of Barclays into the 21st century. In 1996, I found it, as I say, in London on Charing Cross Road. Percival Leigh, the comic English grammar, 1840, he was quite a character, a Scottish surgeon who relinquished his medical practice to become a comic writer. One of the original staffers at Punch, he also wrote the comic Latin grammar, and he liked similes. Quote, "We would have every preface as short as an orator's cough, to which, in purpose, it is so nearly like." Some of the humor still works. He says that although a pronoun is, quote, "a word used instead of a noun, we did not mean to call such words as thingamabob, what's his name, what do you call it, and the like pronouns." 1840. These illustrations are by John Leach. This is from the frontispiece. Notice Lindley Murray. I don't know whether he's being mocked or What the significance of it is, there are switches there for beating children, and then there's a school mistress getting ready to administer some switching, as you see there. Noah Webster, toward the end of his life, comes out with an improved grammar of the English language. 1842, 58 years after his first English grammar, and just a year before his death, the elderly Webster issued this new improvement. Although Lindley Murray had been dead for 16 years, Webster was still plagued by Murray's popularity. All the British grammars were, quote, very imperfect and very erroneous, he said. He contradicted Murray whenever he could, as by saying, the contrary rule in Murray is egregiously wrong. And he persisted in oddball views. Grammars tell us that is sometimes a conjunction. This is not true. It is always a pronoun. Noah Webster. Gould Brown ends our exhibition, The Grammar of English Grammars. It's a capstone. It's a gargantuan book. It says 10th edition, but it first came out in 1851. He disclaimed vainglory but embraced invective, referring freely to, quote, the scandalous errors and defects which abound in all our common grammars. His competitors were miserably defective and worthy of censure, he said. Hence Brown produced this condensed mass of special criticism, such as is not elsewhere to be found in any language. One recent scholar called it a beacon that led to no port, an anachronism that was obsolete before it was finished. Gould Brown. These are the 100 items in the book, Taming the Tongue, all on one cart, and you see the big folios of Samuel Johnson's dictionary on the floor. That's the cover of the book. And, you know, the books are full of interesting illustrations, I think. A lot of it is corporal punishment, frequent motif. Here you see schoolmasters getting ready to hit somebody. Notice in the middle photograph the woman's expression, just sort of a blank expression as the schoolmaster is getting ready to beat this boy. And then, you know, this is from a book for young children, and he's merely illustrating tenses of verbs, present tense and past tense. So present tense, being struck, and past tense, struck. Man strikes, man struck. And the man is down. I mean, it's kind of a surprising, to the modern mind anyway, a surprising illustration to have in a book intended for children. And I close with a little doggerel verse that I found in Caleb Alexander's grammatical system, 1801, signed by Erastus Bradley. And it says, I can stammer English grammar, I can stammer. Erastus Bradley, who lived in, I was able to research him, he lived in New Haven, Connecticut. Unless he had an unknown namesake, he scrawled this at the age of 62 or 63. The figure of speech involved, where you reverse, you repeat phrases in reverse order, is called antistrophe. So that is Taming the Tongue. I hope you enjoy the exhibit. If you read the book, you know, I hope you enjoy the book. I've tried to make it interesting. I tried to cut all dull parts and leave in only the interesting parts. So, thank you all. I do want to thank Jennifer Sheehan for putting up such a wonderful display, and B. Hughes for the online exhibition, and Eric Holzenberg, our executive director at the Grolier Club, for all his help and guidance throughout the whole process. And thanks again to Christina Geiger. I hope to see you at the Grolier Club. Maybe, you know, when we can use the past tense about the pandemic, And thank you all for your interest. I hope to see you again. Thanks.